My husband thought he was building a future for us. He worked overtime, took meetings, trusted his boss. And while he was fighting to get promoted, his boss was in my kitchen, on my couch, in my life. I thought I was in control. I thought I could walk away. But then I got pregnant. And the test that should have brought clarity broke everything. This is my confession. Lucas looked good that night, better than he had in months. Fresh haircut, clean shave, crisp navy suit that made his shoulders look broader. He kept checking his watch, fixing his collar, asking me, "Do I look like someone about to get promoted?" And I smiled and said, "You look like the best thing in the room." I meant it. The company party was held at a hotel ballroom downtown. Champagne tower, live jazz. Everyone dressed like it mattered. Lucas had been talking about it for weeks. The invite, the guest list, the quiet rumors that his name was in line for something big. He was proud to bring me, and I was proud to be there for him. We weren't fancy people, not really. But that night, we played the part. And then I met Richard. I didn't even know who he was at first. He was standing near the bar, drink in hand, smiling in that slow, deliberate way men smile when they already know they're the most powerful person in the room. He introduced himself when Lucas waved him over. "This is Richard Harmon, CEO," he said, almost whispering it, like he didn't want to mess up the moment. Richard shook my hand, looked me in the eye a little too long, and said, "I've heard your husband talk about you." He undersold it. I laughed, nervously. Lucas laughed too, proud, not noticing the way Richard's eyes didn't move from mine. We made small talk. Richard asked where I worked. I told him I did freelance from home. Copywriting mostly, between Mason's school hours and dinner. "Creative and loyal," he said. "Your husband hit the jackpot." At the time, it sounded like flattery. Just charming, powerful man flattery. I didn't know it was a warning. As the night went on, the drinks got stronger. Lucas got more relaxed. Richard stayed near us most of the time. He kept pouring Lucas another. Not forcing, just nudging. "One more won't kill you," he said with a grin. Lucas smiled, lifted his glass. By the end of the night, my husband was laughing at everything, red-cheeked, swaying slightly. He wasn't a heavy drinker. He leaned into me and said, "Can we Uber? Or do you want to drive?" Before I could answer, Richard stepped in. "Let me give you both a lift. I'm heading that way anyway." We thanked him. I shouldn't have. In the car, Lucas dozed off almost immediately. He sat slumped against the window, mumbling something about getting the raise. I watched the city blur past, blinking against the dizzy buzz of too much champagne. Richard drove in silence for a while. Then he said, "He's lucky. You're sharp, and too good to stay invisible forever." I said something polite, something about supporting each other. He laughed once. "You ever get bored of that?" "Of what?" "Waiting for someone else's life to take off while yours is paused." That stuck with me. Long after he pulled up to our house. Long after he helped Lucas out of the car and said, "You've got a good one here. Take care of her." Lucas mumbled thanks, stumbled inside. Richard didn't leave right away. He looked at me, still holding the car door. "I enjoyed meeting you, Hannah. Maybe we'll talk again soon." He said it like a promise. 2 days later, flowers arrived. White lilies. No card. I asked Lucas. He shook his head. "Not me, but I should have." That night, a text. "Do you always make an impression like that?" The number wasn't saved in my phone, but I knew exactly who it was. I should have ignored the message. I should have deleted the number, blocked it, told Lucas, burned the flowers. But I didn't. I stared at the screen for nearly an hour before typing a response so short it almost didn't count. They were beautiful. He wrote back immediately, like you. That should have been the end, but it was the beginning. A few days later, I was cleaning the kitchen when I saw a black SUV pull into our driveway. I thought maybe it was a delivery. But when I opened the door, there he was, Richard in a dark tailored coat, sunglasses, calm as ever. You live close to the office, he said casually, like he wasn't standing on the doorstep of a married woman's home in the middle of a workday. I didn't invite you, I said. He smiled. Didn't think you'd mind. I didn't invite him in, but he stepped inside anyway. He looked around, taking in the photos on the walls, the toys half hidden under the couch, the smell of laundry in the air. Home suits you, he said. But it's not your whole story. Not even close. I folded my arms. What do you want? He stepped closer. To see you again. I'm married. So is half the office. You're my husband's boss. And your husband is doing great. Really great, actually. You should be proud. I felt the threat tucked inside the compliment. I hated it. And I hated how part of me was already waiting to see what he'd say next. He didn't try to touch me that day. He didn't have to. He left after 10 minutes. No kiss, no move. Just a promise. Let me know if you ever want to talk. About anything. Sometimes it's good to be heard by someone who isn't so close to it all. When the door shut behind him, I realized I was shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from something darker. He texted the next day, and the day after that. Short messages, thoughtful, measured, like a fisherman reeling the line in slowly. Lucas had no idea. He came home beaming one night and said, Richard called me into his office. Says I'm on the short list for a senior manager position. It's not official, but I think it's coming. I smiled and kissed him. Said, I'm so proud of you. But inside, something turned. Richard started stopping by more often. Once a week at first, then twice. Always during the day. Always when Mason was at school. Always when Lucas was busy building his future. Sometimes we just talked. He asked about my writing, my childhood, what I'd do if I didn't have to worry about anything. He made me feel like I was more than a mother. More than a wife. He listened like he was taking notes. And then one afternoon, he kissed me. It was quick. Software A test. And I failed. Because I didn't stop him. I didn't pull away. I let it happen. That night, Lucas came home with a bottle of champagne. I got it, he said, smiling wide. The promotion, full benefits, bonus package, it's everything I wanted. We toasted. We laughed. We danced barefoot in the kitchen. He pulled me close and said, You've been so patient with me. I don't know how I got this lucky. And I didn't know how to hold that kind of love in my hands without breaking it. Because the truth was already living in my house. Knocking on the door at noon, smiling with promises I couldn't unhear. And I wasn't sure I knew how to stop any of it anymore. I told myself it would stop after the kiss. That it was just a slip, a mistake, a moment pulled out of context. I told myself I could draw a line. That whatever this was, it hadn't gone too far yet. That I could step back and pretend it never happened. But Richard didn't let me forget it. And neither did the world around me. The day after it happened, Lucas came home with a new work laptop and said, They upgraded me to corporate systems. Richard said I'd need it soon. Bigger things are coming. 2 days later, a surprise bonus. More than we were expecting. Then a weekend work retreat in Napa Valley. Fully paid. Executive track only. Lucas had never even been on a plane for work before. Every time I tried to create distance, Richard closed it. Every time I said no, he found a way to remind me that my husband was thriving because of me. It wasn't direct. He never said the words. But I could feel it. Woven between every gesture, every favor, every new privilege Lucas didn't know came with a price. I ignored Richard's texts for a week. He showed up unannounced. Just wanted to drop this off, he said, holding a designer toy Mason had mentioned once at dinner. Something rare, something expensive, something Lucas and I had said maybe for Christmas about. You're not supposed to be here, I whispered, panicked. Why not? He said calmly. I'm not asking for anything. But he already had something. Me. Or at least enough of me to know I wouldn't slam the door in his face. Not when I knew what else might close behind it. The second time we slept together, I didn't even try to stop it. It was a Thursday. Mason was at school. Lucas was in meetings. Richard said he just needed to talk. He sat on our couch, loosened his tie, and asked how I was feeling. I said, like I'm losing parts of myself in pieces. He said, then let me hold the rest for a while. The words were nothing, but the way he looked at me, calm, certain, undeserving of doubt, was everything. And I gave in. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even pretend I didn't want it. After he kissed my shoulder and said, you make him stronger, you know. He doesn't even realize why he's winning. I wanted to scream, to slap him, to tell him he was wrong. But I didn't. Because deep down, I was starting to wonder if he was right. Lucas came home glowing that night. Richard said I'm his guy, his right hand. Can you believe that? I smiled. Of course I can. Because I already knew how he'd earned it. I tried to end it again. Told Richard we couldn't do this anymore. That I couldn't keep lying to my husband. That it was making me sick. He didn't get angry. He just said, that's your choice, of course, but you should know. There's a round of cuts coming next quarter, and I don't always get a say in who stays and who goes. It wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was a fact wrapped in a shrug, dropped like something harmless. And suddenly my marriage, my family, my home. It all felt like it was sitting on top of something unstable. A transaction. I became numb. Routine held me together, packing Mason's lunch, smiling through school pickups. Sitting across from Lucas at dinner while he gushed about quarterly goals and mentorship from a man who was still leaving his cologne on our bedsheets. I told myself it was just until the next bonus. Until we hit our savings goal. Until the new house. But there's no clean exit from a deal you never officially made. And by the time I realized how deep in I was already pregnant. I stared at the test strip for a long time. It felt like it took hours for those 2 pink lines to appear. But once they did, everything inside me went quiet. I was pregnant, and I didn't know who the father was. Lucas and I hadn't been distant in that way. Not completely. We still had sex. Not often. Not with urgency, but with comfort. Ritual. The soft, grateful kind of love that doesn't come from fire, but from history. So, yes, it could have been his. That was the part I clung to at first. That was the excuse I whispered to myself as I shoved the test into the back of the bathroom drawer. He came home that night with flowers. You've seemed tired lately. Thought maybe these would help. I smiled. I kissed him. I said thank you. I didn't tell him I was carrying a child I might have conceived in our house while he was at work building a future we no longer fully shared. I didn't tell Richard either. Not right away. I wanted it to be Lucas's. God, I needed it to be. I read every article I could find about conception windows. Did back-of-the-envelope math based on meaningless details. When, where, how long. I told myself it was 60-40, then 70-30. I prayed, I cried, and then I pushed it all down. Pretended I was certain. Pretended this was the next chapter we were both ready for. Lucas was over the moon when I told him. He laughed, lifted me off the ground, kissed my stomach like we were brand new again. It's perfect timing, he said. With the promotion, the bonus, the stock options, it's like everything's coming together. And I just nodded, smiling through teeth that ached from being clenched so tight. Richard didn't say anything when he found out. He showed up with a stuffed animal, blue and gray, neutral, expensive. "I heard the good news," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Congratulations, a growing family." I stared at him, silent. He stepped inside without asking, walked around the kitchen like it belonged to him. You know, some people spend their whole lives chasing stability. You found it, all of it. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He turned slowly. "Nothing I haven't already taken." And that was the moment I knew I'd never be free of him. Not really, because whether or not he was the father, he already owned the lie. The months passed. Mason was excited about being a big brother. Lucas kept getting praise, rewards, responsibility. He was on fire at work. And I was shrinking inside myself with every smile I faked, every ultrasound, every "you're glowing" from friends and neighbors who had no idea how poisoned I felt. I thought about leaving once. I thought about telling Lucas everything. But every time I imagined the look in his eyes, not just the betrayal, but the humiliation, I backed down. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the child he was preparing to raise. The career he'd built on a foundation I'd helped pour. The life he thought was his. And I couldn't take that from him. Not yet. Then it happened again. Another test. Another positive. Another wave of silence so loud I thought it would crush me. This time, I couldn't pretend. The dates didn't line up. Not unless I was willing to lie to myself even harder than I already had. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I ordered a test kit online. A prenatal paternity test, unmarked envelope, swab, seal, send, and wait. I kept it hidden. In the drawer, behind bills and notebooks and everything else we never touched. I thought that would be the end of it. Just the knowledge, kept to myself. But secrets don't stay still. Not when they're ticking time bombs. One morning, Lucas came downstairs holding the opened envelope. He didn't say a word. He just held it up and looked at me. And in that moment, I knew. He didn't even need to read the result. The fact that I had sent it was enough. He didn't speak. He didn't throw the paper, didn't yell, didn't curse. He just stood in the kitchen, holding the envelope in one hand, the seal torn open like a wound. There were no results inside. The lab hadn't sent them yet. But that didn't matter. The test itself was the answer. Lucas stared at me like he was seeing a version of me that had always been hiding in plain sight. And I didn't even try to explain. Because what do you say when the lie isn't in the outcome, but in the fact that you needed to ask the question at all? He set the envelope down on the counter, very gently, and then he walked upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close, not a slam, just the soft, inevitable sound of something coming to an end. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the sun to shift across the floor, long enough to forget what time it was, long enough for guilt to settle on my chest like a second heartbeat. When Lucas came back down, he was dressed for work. Suit jacket, tired eyes, no expression. He poured coffee like it was any other day. I opened my mouth to speak. He held up one hand. "Don't." I mean it. Silence. He didn't look at me. He just said, "How long?" And that's when I broke. Because I couldn't answer. Not honestly. Not fully. It had never been about one moment. Not just the night of the party. Not just the ride home. Not just one kiss or one mistake. It had been months, and I had let it happen. Over and over again. "I don't know," I whispered. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course you do." Then he left. Not out of rage. Not because he needed space. He left because he didn't have any reason left to stay. That night, he didn't come home. Mason asked where Daddy was. I told him he had a work trip. He looked at me like he didn't believe me. Not fully. But he nodded and went back to his toys. Children know more than they can say. And that was the moment I realized I hadn't just betrayed my husband. I'd betrayed the home we'd built around our son. The results came 3 days later. Richard's name. Positive match. There was no relief, no tears, no drama. Just confirmation of what I already knew. Of what I had already buried beneath months of silence and complicity. I folded the paper neatly and put it in a locked drawer. I haven't looked at it since. Richard never reached out. He didn't need to. He'd gotten what he wanted. A promotion for my husband, secured by my silence. 2 children, one of whom would never bear his name. A woman who couldn't look at herself in the mirror without seeing a version of herself she couldn't explain. Lucas came back 5 days later. He didn't move out. Didn't file papers. Didn't even ask who the father was. He just said, "We have kids. They deserve peace." And from that day forward, we became 2 actors in a play neither of us believed in anymore. We smiled at school events, shared dinners, laughed at Mason's jokes, but we never touched. Not really. Because the space between us wasn't filled with anger or betrayal. It was filled with truth. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had told the truth sooner. If I had said no when Richard first showed up. If I had slammed the door. If I had drawn a line and kept it. But I didn't. And now I live in the house my husband still pays for, raising a child who looks more and more like a man I can't bear to say the name of. And Lucas? He looks at me sometimes like he wants to ask something, but he never does. Because we both know there's nothing left worth confirming. He never asked for the results, even after he found the envelope. Even after 5 days of absence. Even after moving through the house like a ghost wearing a wedding band, he never once looked me in the eye and said, "Is the baby mine?" That was his punishment. Not distance, not fury, not even silence. But withholding the one thing I never thought I'd be begging for. A question. Because questions meant there was still something left between us to try to understand. Instead, he chose detachment. He slept in the same bed, ate at the same table, drove Mason to school and came home to kiss the baby on the head. But he never touched me again, not even by accident. And I realized the truth doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just erodes, quietly, without a sound. The baby was born in late March, a boy. Beautiful, healthy, quiet. Lucas was there in the room. He held my hand during labor, told me I was strong, kissed my forehead. To everyone else, doctors, nurses, even me in that dazed moment, he looked like the perfect husband, the proud father. He took photos, sent them to family, posted one with the caption, "Welcome to the world, little one. You're already so loved." But when we were alone, he handed me the baby, smiled gently, and walked out of the room without another word. Richard didn't reach out. Not to congratulate. Not to threaten. Not to take ownership. Because he didn't need to. He knew the child would never carry his name, never live in his house, never even be told the truth. He'd made his mark long before I ever took the test. And now he'd moved on. I sometimes wonder if Lucas ever got his own confirmation. Sent in hair from a brush, a swab from the hospital, a shirt with baby drool, in silent hope that maybe, just maybe, his worst suspicions weren't true. But I think in some part of him, he didn't want confirmation. He wanted the space between knowing and proving. He wanted the buffer between who we were and what we'd become. One night, maybe a month after the baby was born, I found him in the nursery, holding the baby. The lights were dim, his face shadowed, the rocking chair creaking slowly under his weight. He didn't see me at first. He was just looking down, studying the little boy in his arms like he was memorizing a stranger. I wanted to say something. Anything. But before I could speak, Lucas whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear it, "I'm going to raise you anyway." He looked up, saw me in the doorway, didn't flinch, didn't smile. He stood, laid the baby gently in the crib, and walked past me without touching my arm or brushing against my shoulder or looking into my eyes. Because what more was there left to say? Now, months later, we still live together. People call us lucky, tell us we're a team, a couple that makes it look easy. They see photos of us holding both boys, smiling, standing close, matching sweaters at Christmas. But they don't see the gap between our hands. They don't see the way Lucas moves through life like a man doing his duty. They don't see how I cry into a towel so the baby monitor won't pick it up. They don't see the weight of a truth that was never shouted, only swallowed. Lucas never left. But he's not here either. He exists in a separate space now. One where forgiveness doesn't live, but survival does. And I exist in a loop of pretending. For Mason. For the baby. For the world. For the husband who shows up every single day, but will never, ever come back to me. Because once you cheat on someone with the person who holds their future in their hands, you don't just betray their trust. You take away their dignity. And that's the one thing no apology can ever give back.